This program is made possible in part by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, one of America's top research universities, preparing students for today's interdependent world with internationally focused academic and outreach programs. The Institute of World Affairs at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee presents International Focus, a weekly discussion of the people and events behind today's global headlines. Now, here's your host, Doug Savage.
Welcome to International Focus. A recent study by the New York-based Human Rights Foundation found that citizens in 94 of the world's nations, representing 53% of humanity, live under non-democratic regimes. A slide towards authoritarianism is also underway in several countries with supposedly well-established democratic traditions. To help us explore what's behind this phenomenon, what it means for societies involved, and what citizens are doing to protect and preserve their rights, we're joined by Maina Kiai, a Kenyan lawyer and human rights activist. His 20-plus year career has included positions as chairman of Kenya's National Human Rights Commission, director of Amnesty International's Africa program, and United Nations Special Rapporteur on the rights to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. He's received numerous international awards for his work, including Freedom House's Freedom Award and the AFL-CIO's George Meany Lane Kirkland Human Rights Award for his efforts highlighting human rights violations against workers. Maina, welcome to International Focus.
Thank you very much.
Well, let's start with the most general question, if we could. Are we facing a global democratic recession, if you will?
I think the answer is irrevocably yes, we are. And I think that the facts on the recent Freedom House report that came out a few weeks ago showed that most countries are receding in terms of democratic progress. And it's not just the old north-south divide or west versus the rest. Even in those traditional democracies, there's less and less respect for human rights and democratic values. There's more and more intolerance growing across the world. And this is also, and because the West itself is having this intolerance, it is spurring more and more intolerance in countries that are not traditionally democratic. So there is a recession, there's no doubt about that. And I think the question now is what else is going on at that time. So we've got a situation where leadership, political leaders and other kinds of leaders are pushing against democratic values and to a large extent against dissent and against allowing citizens to speak out, but also challenge them. And efforts are being made in terms of hammering the media, and you can tell when there's a recession in terms of the way leadership operates. So when leaders attack the media, whether they call it fake news or it's not right, or when they attack the judiciary, then when they begin to say the judiciary is bad and is not doing the right thing by ruling against the regime, or when you find civil society is under siege and opposition leaders are under siege, then you know that you're on the path towards autocracy. And that's a dangerous thing for all of us in the world.
So, to what extent has the sort of change in the posture of what we would consider typically well-developed, well-entrenched democracies towards less democratic regimes impacted this? I mean, there was a time when members of the U.S. diplomatic corps would regularly hector their host governments on their human rights issues. We haven't seen much of that lately.
It's changed a lot because, firstly, the U.S. itself is no longer the beacon of freedom and democracy it used to be. The U.S. and experiences in the U.S., much more the individuals and communities like civil rights movement have really inspired generations of activists across the world in terms of resistance, resilience, persistence in a lot of the work. But the U.S. as a government, and particularly in the last 10, 15 years, has gone down as it's shrank and become less confident internationally, and it's also become more and more autocratic, seemingly, within itself. And as people are observing that U.S. democracy is far from perfect, very, very far from perfect, then people are less likely to look to the U.S. and it loses its moral moral strength. It's to be able to say you should do the right thing. You know, the big question one asks now of the U.S.: how can it be that somebody gets 3 million more votes and is still not declared the winner? That doesn't make sense anywhere in any society. So there are many parts of that issue that are rising. But the U.S. has also made, in a sense, it's not new, because back in the days of the Cold War, the U.S. would support any regime as long as it supported the U.S. So whether you are a dictatorship, an autocracy, a military regime, whether it's Chile, it's Zaire, it's even apartheid South Africa, as long as you positioned yourself as pro-U.S., you got support. So, and that seems to be happening again, but now within the context of security, the context of terrorism, in the context of those are the major things where the U.S. seems to be saying, as long as you support us, and support our fight against terrorism, our fight for security, then you can do whatever you want. So states and regimes that have understood it. They also understand the weakness of the US and the West itself, including Britain and Germany and all the other countries. They're not as strong as they used to be. So that moral high ground they used to occupy has receded. And that means then people are not looking anymore to the West for strength, for support, for encouragement in terms of the work they're doing. So you're now, in a sense, we're back to a place where we are on our own in the South. We are fighting for democracy, you're fighting for freedom. We are on our own, and we recognize that, and we're going to do our own struggles according to our own visions and our own ideas. Yeah.
Well, let's talk a little bit about that process. I mean, the sort of hackneyed metaphor is the frog in the pot, which would jump out of boiling water, but if the water is increased slowly and the temperature, he will stay until he's cooked. So is that more like the process we've seen in places where this recession is occurring? I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, does it, typically?
Sometimes it does. I mean, you see signs. You see signs of a leader trying to push back democratic values. And then there's resistance, and then sometimes they basically do an explosion. We saw that in Turkey, where there was a coup attempt that then that the president used to then enhance himself and basically take up autocratic powers. So you've got that sense where a place like Turkey is different. But and what we're seeing as well, we've seen that in places like Kenya now, where they're basically becoming tough and saying, from now on, we're not going to tolerate dissent. If you dissent, we can even deport you. And we've got the first case I've ever seen anywhere in the world where a Kenyan-born person is deported out of Kenya to Canada because he's dual nationality. And the Kenyan constitution allows dual nationality. So they strip him of his Kenyan nationality and deport him. And it goes, so it's a lot of, so you can see it. And the signs are often very clear, Doug, in the sense that dictators or would-be autocrats have got a template, which is media. We don't like critical media, so let's muzzle the media. Civil society that's critical, let's muzzle them, let's intimidate them, let's jail them if we have to, let's cripple them financially. There's opposition, let's find a way to weaken the opposition and intimidate them that they can't speak. And the one most important one is the judiciary. So their first step is making sure they control the legislature, so that the legislature does not act as a check on the executive. And that's easy to do because politics is not so difficult. The other one's a bit harder. But when there's a persistent attack on them, then they get what they want. So they telegraph their views way in advance, and so you can always see it coming. And I think it takes. I mean, you saw Egypt as another one where you can see where Al-Sisi, basically as soon as he came to power, with the significant support of the U.S. and Western countries through a military coup, has now fashioned himself into a civilian, is going to an election where he's running against himself because nobody else is allowed to. And if you say you're going to run, they arrest you. So you can see that is now an autocracy, and there's no democracy, no democratic space in that country.
Well, and that's certainly one convenient way of getting the outcome you want. You don't have to do any vote rigging if the only candidate
is yourself.
Is
correct,
yourself.
Correct. And you've seen countries like Ethiopia where they do an election and they have the results saying that 100% of the votes and the seats go to the ruling party. There's nowhere in life where you'll have total support. Nowhere. Or you have countries like Rwanda where the president is the candidate of his own party, but also of about 7 opposition parties. They nominate the current president, and then he gets 94%, 95%. How do that epitomizes autocracy in every sense of the word.
So, I mentioned at the outset, there are places without a historical, deep tradition of democracy, but we've seen a similar phenomenon in places where ostensibly there is. So talk a little bit about that. Talk about places like Hungary and Poland, and to a lesser extent even Germany and the AfD.
I mean, you see, there's a sense now that leadership finds they have got a space to they won't get opposed by the countries that normally would have led the charge for democratic space. So Hungary, which is, and you can see these are basically newish democracies, ever since the end of the Cold War. And so they're not very stable. But even then you find people coming into power and they have a vision of their own. And often, if you see, that vision is always around intolerance, has an intolerant aspect to it. And it seems that they think the only way then to implement an intolerant vision is by clamping down and stopping people from speaking out, tying up the judiciary so it votes for you and it rules in your favor, cutting down resources for civil society. So you see that in Poland, you see that in Hungary. What we see in Poland, what's been fascinating, is once it's happening, people also come out and show their resistance and resilience against it. And you can be sure that if the EU, the European Union, does not take a stand against Hungary and Poland and begin to put them on notice, these steps will increase. What I find fascinating is that where people's visions, where leadership visions are for tolerance, they will never ever go that autocratic route. Never. They'll allow debate, they'll allow dissent, they'll allow people to insult them, but they don't clamp down. So it's fascinating. And the other thing that you see as well, which I find fascinating, is that in these emergent democracies and newer democracies, even the old democracies, actually, even older like the US, is that intolerance finds a way through the tools of free expression. In this country, First Amendment rights, and uses those tools that are meant to defend the weak, the marginalized, as a sword to now hurt the weak and marginalized even more. So I find it fascinating the way the world is going, that we are using tools that have been created or put in place to increase the space. Now they're being used now to decrease that space. So it tells you that democracy is not yet done. I mean, it's still unfinished business in terms of creating democracies that are resilient and can survive. But the lesson I've learned over the last few years is that we should never, ever take anything for granted. That you could have a democracy, it could go away very, very fast, very fast. And it sometimes just takes persistence on those who don't want democracy to get where they want to go. So the price, as they say, the price of freedom is eternal vigilance, and that's very true up to now.
So, to what extent do you think there's an economic component to this? I mean, when you have a segment of the population that feels economically marginalized and in any case economically threatened, I think they're more susceptible to some of these, at least initial phase policies of a government that's sliding towards autocracy.
I think, and thank you for that question, because I think that this is the unspoken issue that many people in the pro-democracy movements across the world are not addressing. The whole question of inequalities within countries and between countries. Inequality breeds anger. When people are seeing that their lifestyle isn't improving and others are making billions and billions. When the Oxfam produces a report that says 8 men own more than half the world's population, there is a problem. And even if we give that, maybe Oxfam may have been a bit wrong. If so, you say 1,000 men own more than half the world's population. We have a problem in the world in a very big sense. So when the economy is not working to support you, then we have trouble. The economy is not. You can see the economy is bigger. You can see there's more wealth, but it's only benefiting a few. You have a problem. Now, there are two ways in which you can react to that. And one is therefore you then become more intolerant and say, therefore, let's kick out anybody who doesn't look like me because they're taking my job. Or the other way to say, look, the problem is that the world as it is now is twisted towards those who are rich, and they are controlling everything. So we'll gang up together against the powerless, will come together, and using the power of the powerless, will fight to make this a better world. Again, you can see a part of that trend from the end of the Cold War, that once the Soviets and the communism and socialism ceased being a threat, then we opened up and deregulated business to such a large extent that it's hurt us all. When you see the trends that there are less and less workers who are unionized, then you have trouble, because unionization essentially also leads to more and more progressiveness, no matter the state of the unions. And I know unions also need to go through their own process of reinventing themselves, asserting where they're going to work and how they're going to work. That's an issue that all of us have to do. But I think there's a whole sense that if there's no protection of people coming when they come together, fighting alone and being called an independent contractor, you are way, way weaker when you have many of you who can fight, who can come together and assert and push something. So the decline in unionization, the decline in associations for normal average workers has contributed to that inequality, has contributed then to the lack of a common voice that can say, guys, this is not just about me. My poverty, my increasing poverty isn't just about me. It's because we are seeing everybody's being attacked. And it's grouped as well within the environmental movement, if you don't mind, because you find that the world's biggest environmental abuser are these big companies who are mining everywhere without caring. They're destroying forests in Latin America, in Africa, in Asia, and getting away with it. And again, the victims and the people who are suffering are always the poor indigenous people or the poor people around there who are losing. And they don't have the means to come together to then say, let's push this together as a group and join up with labor, join up with human rights people, join up with opposition if we have to, and be able to push this together. That's where the weakness is at.
So, to the extent that there's a common thread in each of these governments sliding in this direction, what is it? Who benefits from this? Obviously, there's the stereotypical corrupt leader who is pocketing billions and Swiss bank accounts and all of that. But is there a commonality among societies of who benefits from this sort of slide towards authoritarianism?
As you said, for the first part, people benefit are those who are in control, those who are ruling. But also, some big business also benefits. And I know there's a big debate in the human rights circles about whether democracy is good for business. Generally speaking, yes, a fair system is good for business. But if you're not interested in fair competition, if you're interested in making money no matter how, then an autocracy works for you, because, first of all, in autocracies, profit margins are incredibly high. And then two, if you just know how to play that game, you will get the contracts, you'll get the things you need, and you'll make money out of it. So there's people like those who are benefiting out of autocracies. And thirdly, autocracies can be quite efficient sometimes. They could be quite, because there's no debate. This is my way or the highway. You take my way. If you're not, you're going to go to jail. So there is that sense of entitlement also that comes up. Some people feel entitled. So autocracies, whether they're monarchies or whichever form that they come out, military regimes, so-called elected leaders, and it's a sense they all have a sense of entitlement. They feel better than everybody else. So those are the beneficiaries of it, and so those are the ones who are leading this charge and sadly succeeding at it. And it's where we have got to find. There are some pockets where there's resistance is working, and South Korea is a good example where the people came together, again, an alliance of different constituencies coming together and forcing the then president to be impeached. So you have some of those success stories, but by and large, the last few years have been negative stories.
Well, so if the oligarchs, if we can use that term, benefit under that sort of system, what are the effects on the average citizenry? I mean, are there empirical indicators of people doing less well?
Well, the one thing we can say is that the world is producing much more than it's ever done. So production levels globally are higher than they've ever been. That's a fact. The second fact we can put out is that the number of people in the middle class has risen, primarily because of China and India, when they began moving people out below the poverty line. So there is benefits to broader and broader productivity. But the loser in it all is the person who sits there and is living by his or her wits, who can't guarantee their job, who's living as an independent contractor, who doesn't know whether they'll have the job tomorrow or not, who really is at the mercy of employers and governments the way they want to go. And the fact is that as the gap becomes bigger, then you find people are going to be, there's more. The cake is bigger, but what you're getting is less than it used to be before. We have seen again across the world wages have stood stagnant. I think that's again another fact. The fact is that even though productivity has gone up globally, the profits that are made by companies are no longer shared with the workers and the workforce and the employees. They are now shared by the CEOs, who get huge bonuses, plus the shareholders. So they're the ones benefiting. So all those things then combine, I think, to make the world a less happier place. If you can't have regulations around environment, then as well we will all suffer, because we all know the consequences of bad environment now. So if the trees in the Amazon are just going and going and going, it will have an impact on us. If global warming continues the way it's going, it will have an impact on all of us. So we are all the losers in that sense. Short term, maybe people think they're doing well, but long term, it hurts all of us. And I think that a world where there's more tolerance and caring for you becoming your brother's or sister's keeper is a much better world where we all feel better. Again, we see, and this is again a proven fact, that when there's dissatisfaction and frustration in societies, then crime and criminality rises as well. And it may seem to be unrelated to democratic values, but there's a real correlation in the sense that people extract themselves from the system and feel, well, we've nothing to lose, so let's go ahead and do so. And it's not coincidental that this country, USA, has got one of the world's, I think it's the world's largest prison population. It's unconscionable. The country with a constitution like that it has got and a history that it's got should have so many people incarcerated as it does. And I think there's issues there about criminality and how the criminal justice system is created to put people in jail. It says a lot about that shrinking democratic space.
Well, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about a case study of which you have more than an academic interest, the recent situation in Kenya. Walk us through what happened with the election, or should I say elections?
Kenya is an interesting country. It's very frustrating, but never boring. It's very interesting, but it's very frustrating in the sense that we've gone up and when we've gone down, we've gone up again, gone down. Our most recent success, and the really big success, was the passing of a new constitution in 2010. It is a damn good constitution, better than the American Constitution by far. You would never have a situation where somebody has 3 million more votes and becomes president. You would never have that at all. So it's a good constitution on paper. Our problem is that the people who are governing the country, who are now ruling the country, do not like that constitution. So they're doing whatever they can to weaken it and weaken it. So in 2017, we'll have these elections, and they're supposed to be done differently with electronic safeguards to make sure that the vote is protected. And again, you have to understand that Kenya and many African countries, there's a lot of mistrust around voting because votes have been consistently manipulated in favor of the ruling elite, the ones who are ruling. So they've been trying to put safeguards into it. 2 weeks before the election, the person responsible for the electronic safeguards, Chris Musando, is murdered. And in a murder that seems weird, very, very weird. Anyway, the election happens, and when you do the math, because we vote ethnically, so we know where support is. When you do the math, it doesn't seem likely at all that Uhuru Kenyatta can win. There's no way under the ethnic calculation he can win. But we go through this, and then the results start coming through, and we're finding that, hey, these are funny results. Why are they coming? And Kenyatta keeps maintaining, the gap that he's winning is consistent. He goes up, they go up together with his opposition, with the opposition leader, his challenger. So there's a lot of uncertainty and people wondering what's happened here. Remember, this is after Chris Musando, who was in charge of that process, has been eliminated. And so we now don't know who's running this electronic system. And then we go to the elections, and the Election Commission decides to announce, to announce that Kenyatta has won. Before then, there was a lot of issues around the election body. There's infighting and divisions. The opposition goes to court. The court then orders what they call a scrutiny of the IT system, and then does a scrutiny of the forms. So the forms are done. There's they're handwritten. The election body refuses to open up its servers, just basically ignores the court order. When they do the scrutiny of the papers, now the hard copies, the forms, they find of the ones from the constituencies, the 290 constituencies, 80 of them, because they look at 290 forms, 80 of them are not the original form. they are duplicates. The serial numbers don't match. So they don't even look at the figures. So the forms that are supposed to be original and guaranteed are not the ones. So there's questions about how that came into being. And you find right through them that there's illegalities and irregularities.
We'll have to go to the fast forward. We've got about a minute left.
Okay.
So I'd like to get to the end of the story.
So at the end of the story, at the end of the day anyway, so when we now go to the second election, we find that the opposition withdraws, says there's no guarantee they'll be fairer than they were before, and so we're pulling out. Kenyatta then is declared the winner. The long and short of it is that we've got an illegitimate president in office where more than half the country does not accept him as a president. The opposition leader has then had himself sworn in as the people's president, a symbolic gesture to be basically telling Kenyans that we are going to continue struggling on. The long and short of it is that Kenya is in a crisis and will be in a crisis for a while. And until Uhuru Kenyatta decides that he needs to talk to the opposition to find a solution to some of these things, we're going to be in trouble in Kenya.
Well, thank you for that. Thank you for your work. And thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Maina
And I'm
Kiai.
sorry I took so long on that Kenya question.
And to our viewers, we'll see you next time on International Focus.
This program is made possible in part by the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, one of America's top research universities, preparing students for today's interdependent world with internationally focused academic and outreach programs.